Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the adventure, The Incredible Balloon Bamboozle. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. Too much alliteration. Designed by Duncan Rhodes for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, you can reach out to me via email, Twitter, or Discord, or my submission form at roguewatson.com. And if you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. So this is actually a really interesting concept. I previously reviewed a very big campaign-sized adventure from this designer about 2 years ago called Dragon Bowl. That was kind of a send-up of a big Super Bowl-esque party and had a huge storyline there where you could take part in the actual gladiatorial games, and there was all these different shenanigans going on. It was all very satirizing, capitalism and corporate structure and things, which I always love. And I had some criticisms about it, but overall I was really impressed with that product. And then the designer has spun off basically one of those, one of the events that happens in that story, which is an optional thing you can do is try to grab the airship plans while you're invited onto the, essentially like the Goodyear blimp or the Budweiser blimp or whatever. And then also combines that with another event that happens at the end of the story when you're also on there after having won the big gladiatorial games. There's a big attack from Xanathar forces, and that's kind of the big epic climax of the story. The designer has basically taken elements from that product, that adventure, and turned it into a standalone heist adventure, basically inspired by Keys from the Golden Vault, which I really like. Keys from the Golden Vault. You can see my review of that one as well as my ranking videos. And this is definitely a heist. I mean, the original one was kind of a heist. The original one, I believe, was, in fact, I'm going to tab over to it for a second. This is the original Dragon Bowl content, which is just one of, the locations in the Dragon Ball area, the airship. It does last for a couple pages, and then the actual heist, I believe, is in chapter 8, so it's further. There we go, the Sky Party, and it mentions the Sky Heist here on page 229. So that's just something that can happen basically during this party, and this is an entire adventure built for level 5 parties. Now, as far as heists go, first of all, I love heists, but I also think they're one of the hardest things to design because there's a lot of moving parts. You have to create a very intricate, dungeon design, no matter what your dungeon happens to be. If it's an airship in this case, / Zeppelin or whatever, there has to be an interesting, security system there. You have to create complications, hopefully have detailed NPCs. There's just, you're kind of inviting your players to create chaos, and D&D is already invites chaos in a lot of ways. So I just think a heist has the potential to be some of the most amazing content you can run for Dungeons & Dragons, but also I think from a design standpoint, probably one of the more complicated structures you can try to design. I think this one does a very, very excellent job of creating an interesting, memorable heist structure, with maybe just one complaint from me, which is unfortunately kind of near the beginning. First of all, I don't expect a lot of different adventure hooks. In every heist adventure, you're basically needing to get a MacGuffin item. Sometimes that thing can be more than a MacGuffin and be, end up being something more, I guess. But you're usually trying to get a thing. I guess in a few of the Golden Vault ones, you're trying to maybe return a thing or something. But in this case, what you're trying to steal is the plans to the airship itself. This proprietary technology is obviously very impressive, and others are trying to get their hands on it. In this case, it's the Harpers, and you actually get to work with Mert, who is one of the masked lords of Waterdeep, I believe, if I know my limited Forgotten Realms lore. So I'm okay that there's not a whole lot of different adventure hooks. There are alternate patrons you can technically use. You could use anybody, but it always starts kind of the same, where you're being hired by, people to go steal the airship plans. The part that I don't like specifically is that it railroads the players into getting onto the airship in only one certain way. And one thing I really like about heist structures, and I mainly come at this from heist video games, I haven't done a whole lot of heists in D&D, is when I realize I have multiple choices, at least on how to start the heist, right? Because things will always devolve and get crazy as we go, but at least getting, in other words, if I see a building and maybe there's a vent over here, I can just sneak and crawl my way through and end up in some part. Maybe at the very entrance I can disguise myself as somebody and then get into the entrance. Maybe in the back I can try to just ambush some guards and get in through the back way. Or maybe there's some way I can, lift off from the top and disable some locks and traps and go in that way. In other words, allow for different party compositions to make different choices on how to get inside. And maybe they even want to split the party and do it multiple ways and get in through multiple avenues, because we all have different strengths. Some people are going to be better at doing disguises than others, and better at stealthing, for example. This one, it kind of forces everybody to come in via the you're going to disguise yourselves as NPCs thing, which, hopefully your players are into, and not everybody has to be the face of the party and really take over. I do appreciate that the actual NPCs that are given, basically the context is they kidnap a bunch of these NPCs, and then the players can disguise as them, and they're kind of a hilariously eclectic group. There's sibling singers or performers. There's a 7-foot tall Aarakocra war veteran. There's a kobold inventor. There's a kind of shady Yuan-Ti priest. There's just a buxom middle-aged woman who loves blood and booze and flirting with younger men. So I appreciate that there's a lot of detail for these characters, and that's kind of where the complications to this heist come in, is when the players disguise themselves, which, by the way, there's a whole thing where if you want someone wants to disguise themselves as the 7-foot tall Aarakocra, there's a bird suit they can wear, which should also lead to some funny hijinks and shenanigans. It does have a lot of the humor that Dragon Ball has, by the way. Dragon Ball was a very, very funny, humorous adventure that it leaned on that kind of corporate satire a lot, obviously making fun of like Super Bowl stuff and the fact that corporate sponsors and all that, just making fun of a lot of the capitalist stuff that I think goes over pretty well for most of the audience. And I think that is reflected here very, very well. That's not to say you're going to roll your eyes and be like, all right, but I want to play a serious adventure. I think this is a serious adventure. Like with all seriousness, it sets up like there's proper security in place. Like it's a real structured place. It just also has a lot of that, tongue-in-cheek kind of jokes and stuff. One of my favorites is that the pilots, I forget the captain's name, but the co-pilot is Dewey, who's a Yeti. It's a just hilarious reference that I laughed at, so I thought that was enjoyable. We also get a really great, which is true for Keys to the Golden Vault as well, a classic heist plan map, which is basically, unfortunately, pretty much the same map that we get for the actual airship itself, which is a bummer. I was really hoping we would get a better updated map this time around. This was part of the original map, which is shown in a few pages later of the adventure, because, well, I always going to complain about any kind of map that's not going to look good on a VTT, because that's where I play most of my games. But also, if you're going to specifically structure your entire book, your entire adventure around a single location, I would really spring to make that location look as good as possible. And especially with an airship, it's such a cool location, but it literally can be tricky to tell because there's a lot of ladders, there's a lot of stairs, there's a lot of elevation changes, and that gets difficult when you're only looking at the map from the top down, which you kind of have to do to, play a normal grid-based war game, which is what D&D is. So I would have appreciated some better map art, but I do love that we get the very classic, like, hey, here's the information we've collected for you, so you know that ahead of time. Here's some dossiers on these NPCs that you can learn, and there's just some cool complications. Like one of them, there's a Dwergar who, once you get on board, there's a bunch of goblins who are going to try to kidnap and kill you. The kobold and the priest actually have meetings set up with the airship leader Kenja, who is actually secretly a Red Wizard of Thaze. You don't have to feel bad about her being your main, antagonist through this whole thing, because she actually is pretty evil, I guess. So I appreciate that there was a fun bit of complications. But again, that's only if the players want to go that route. To me, I'd want to give them some more, options and get in. There's one sidebar that happens, where is it? Right here, a kitchen heist, where it mentions, hey, maybe instead of doing that, they want to board the airship by posing as additional catering staff. But then that's all it is, just this little bit of kitchen heist here, and it's like they can get in through the kitchen and just pose as staff. And I'm glad that that's in here, but I wish the designer had done more things like that. Like, hey, here's some more options. Or maybe there's a bunch of, pilots standing, they've got these flying disc things that it's being supported by that act as security. So maybe there's, some that are on their, beer break or something, and you can take over a flying disc and make it in there, or do, just give the player some more options, I think would have been a lot of fun. And then if that happens, then I would still have these NPCs. And there's a fun complication where you can have the NPCs, the real ones show up, like one or two of them, and then there's a fun like Spider-Man meme of like, wait, it's that person, and you have to deal with the the ramifications of that. There's not a lot of locations. It's not a huge, it's an airship. Here's the actual proper map. But I think there's enough to have definitely a fun heist. There's security cameras everywhere. There's this really funny like Scry-Fi Dragon branded equipment that all works literally like it reminds me of playing Shadowrun basically, which has been years ago, but where you actually have like modern day or near future security systems, but of course it's all just Forgotten Realms magic in this case. But there's teleportation rings where you can zip around. They can look through everybody with these eyes, so that's a pretty big security system they have to deal with before they have to make it up, of course, to the office, where they should start in the lowest floor and make their way up. And I'm very thankful, at least with the maps, we got this kind of side view, because otherwise this would be a real mess to try to figure out where all these different like levels and elevations are actually located. So I appreciate that we got a little side view, and I think I understand how this works with this. God, it all looks either phallic or fallopian tube to me. But I think this one right here, the A11, A12 thing, is this undercarriage here, with this being the cockpit at the penis tip of it. And then this thing looks like a Y-wing, I believe, is up here. And then we've got the very tallest, which is the hoity-toity meeting lounge, the actual place you're trying to get to. It's either 15 or 16. One of them is her office, and the other one is her quarters, where you'll steal the actual airship plans from. So instead of it being a lot of like scripted complications, it's kind of like all the NPCs that they were disguised at have complications that then come up. So, unfortunately, the adventure does rely on the fact that the players are taking that initial opening and then going with it from there. So if you wanted what I wanted, which was different avenues of getting inside, unfortunately, there's not other complications that you could introduce. However, there is one big complication that appears towards the end that really turns this heist into a full-blown like James Bond action movie, or maybe Indiana Jones or something. So I believe there is an actual Zeppelin scene in, was it Last Crusade, I think, where they actually board a Zeppelin. And in this case, it is taken directly from Dragon Ball, and that is that the Xanathar is going all, I was going to say Sleeping Beauty Maleficent, feeling a little bit spurned by the no invite, and thinking that this whole place takes place, this whole area takes place in Waterdeep, very near Skullport. I believe it's it's in Waterdeep Mountain, I guess. And the Xanathar just launches a huge brazen open-ended attack where he just appears with his anti-magic cone, and that fucks up everything in the Zeppelin, and people can't, escape with the teleportation rays. And he's got harpies coming in, and then like bugbears riding on those stolen flying discs, and it's just a full-on assault that happens during whatever moment you want to trigger that as the DM, and it just sounds really friggin' awesome. And it's basically like, you've done the whole heist thing of it, it's mainly social stuff. There's probably not a lot of combat this whole time, and then all of a sudden you have this huge like combat encounter actually appear in the form of this giant like Underdark army coming in, led by the Xanathar himself, who's like firing rays and his anti-magic cone and all this absolute craziness. So that sounds really cool. And we did get a full color battle map for that scene, which I think helps a lot with structuring maybe like where the beholder is in relation to this map. It is a 5-foot square map, it says, so the thing is actually to scale. So you can even put little, you could zoom in and put little tokens on there if you wanted to battle it out or something, or just use it as a, if people get thrown off or something. There's a really fun like cinematic landing table where, by the way, the airship isn't like an airplane where if you fall you die. It's like 50 feet off the ground. At least the bottom end is 50 feet. I guess the top would be like 100, 150 or something, however tall the thing is. So it's not the end of the world, especially because we all know falling damage does not scale for player hit points very well. That turns them into superheroes pretty quickly. But if you don't even want to use that, you can use cinematic fall table, which you fall into different areas of the Dragon Ball thing, which they aren't really, that's outside of the context of this adventure, by the way. If you wanted to, you could get that entire Dragon Ball, adventure, and then have all those locations detailed if you wanted to run it that way. But this just assumes you're really just using the airship itself. And then if you do fall, it's kind of like background stuff, and then you can hopefully get back into the proper action. But I love all the little handouts that are included. We do get the actual airship plans, which is pretty fun. They're actually right at the end, right here. Which I thought that was really neat. Usually the MacGuffin is just that. It's a MacGuffin. It's just, we'll turn this in. But I like the fact that we actually got a proper handout to give out to the players as a fun reward. And then, as I said, we get those Little color map here, over half a dozen magic items, which is all the fun Dragon Ball. I like the little TM, the trademark at the end again, kind of that corporate satire humor. Dragon screens. It literally is just all like bullshit, like this modern day technology, but done in like a fantasy world, scry-fi technology and all this. It's very cute and fun, and something that that Dragon Ball was all about, and this one definitely has a lot of that. But again, I think it balances the fun and the wink wink with an actual like legitimately fun story and heist adventure, really. So I'm all for this concept for spinning this little relatively like optional side quest and event thing from Dragon Ball into an entire full-fledged heist adventure. Let's go over my pros and cons for the Incredible Balloon Bamboozle. I almost put a con for the title. I do not like the title. I'm sorry. It's kind of stupid. Pro, a Zeppelin is an awesome location for a heist. Huge thumbs up. You've already got me halfway on board. Like, that's amazing. A lot of heists, part of their fun, and including if you go back and look at my stuff from Keys from the Gold Vault, a lot of that is where does it take place? Like, what is the location? Because that can automatically make things more interesting. Is it in the middle of a volcano, or is it in the middle of, or is it in this castle that's like half being turned into like frozen ash or something floating in the air? Like, there's a lot of cool, interesting venues you can set up, and an airship, a literal like Goodyear or Budweiser style like corporate airship thing in the middle of this like corporate shenanigan stuff is just a really fun idea for stealing and for having a heist set in there. Just absolutely awesome. Pro balances serious adventure with silly hijinks and satirical themes. If you are worried that this was going to go overboard with the humor or anything, I would say you don't have to worry about that. I think it does an excellent job of actually balancing all that. There's a lot of little funny bits here and there, some funny references, but I have read a lot of stuff that's made me just roll my eyes and shake my head at how like, try hard it is when it comes to humor, and this is not that. I think this does a really good job of creating that balance, because a lot of the humor is going to come from the players, right? That's the thing, and that's something I would probably give out as advice to all DMs is, you're and if it's not, then you're playing a more serious D&D game, which is also fine, but rely on your players to create a lot of the silly hijinks and goofy stuff. You don't necessarily need your content to do that, but you should create those complications. And I think another pro is that it has intriguing party guests and interesting and memorable complications that arise. Now we'll go into a con I have later, but at least it spins off of all those disguises the players can be, and that's what then creates all the different complications. And then there is also a table that I glossed over. Where is that table? Right here, intriguing Sky Party guests, and as well as key Dragon Ball staff, I guess. But this creates more characters that you can use to interact with all your people, including just straight up Jarlaxle. And I think a lot of these also, well, maybe not a lot, maybe some of them, are from Dragon Ball as well, which is totally fine. Again, this is, designer's not trying to hide it. Like, this is literally all has been created from Dragon Ball, but you've seen enough content here that if you have Dragon Ball, what's mentioned as a heist is literally just, I'll switch over to the tab. It's literally this. It's like, half a page of information, whereas this takes that half a page and turns into a, 30 or 40 page adventure content. Pro, huge, awesome, climactic complication when the Xanathar's army attacks. So instead of a lot of little scripted things that happen here and there, although they do happen for the most part, you're going to get one big action sequences that turns the whole thing into an action movie, which I think a lot of, especially cinematic heists, that's how it goes, right? Like the third act, unless you've got a twist or something happening, I guess that's usually what happens, but it is some kind of big, plans blow up and it turns into an action sequence. There's chase scenes, there's people getting caught or having to run, like whatever's going on. In this case, it's just a full-on war that the players are kind of caught in the middle of, and they're still trying to get their job done while the chaos is happening. And this is very much a case of a designer saying, all right, I'm just throwing complications out there, and you players are having to find the solutions or not, or just try and survive the chaos that's happening around them. And pro, half a dozen magic items. I like all the fun little Dragon Ball stuff. It's it's fun. It's very wink wink funny without being too over the top. And frankly, you can ignore a lot of it if you want to, especially as the players. But as a DM, you've got all these extra kind of tools and security systems, which I think is a nice way of having that kind of arms race you have between DMs and players when it comes to heists, especially. I think it's increasingly hard. Obviously, I said earlier, heists in general are hard to design. but heists get way more complicated once your players start getting access to just spells like fly or something, or knock, invisibility. Like all of these spells can just kind of break heists, and hopefully it can break them in interesting ways. But then if you want your actual thing to challenge those players, then you need to be able to have security measures in place. And I think this does it a pretty good job for 5th level players to have a good challenge for them. Cons, as I mentioned, my one big con for really the adventure and the story is that I really feel like it kind of railroads the players at the very beginning in a way that I love the idea of impersonating people. I think that's fun. That's something as a player and a DM I would always encourage players to do. I think that's a really fun way to go about it. What I don't like necessarily is that Mert, you go to him and he specifically says, "Hey, we've kidnapped all these people. Here's some identities for you. Here's how you're going to get inside." Because I feel like a lot of players, it could either balk at that concept or be like, "Well, I don't want to disguise myself. Can I just sneak in a different way or whatever?" And unfortunately, Adventure doesn't seem to account for that unless you want to sneak in as a kitchen staff, I guess, which is that little tiny sidebar. So I would appreciate just a few more avenues or ways of getting inside. That could have given the player some more options. That being said, I do think the disguise angle is done very, very well here, and so well that I would definitely encourage the players to do that. It's just a shame that it feels a little bit forced at the very beginning here. And then the other con I have is the map art for the actual airship itself is just very underwhelming. For me, somebody who runs on a VTT, this is not something I would really be able to use or want to use. For something like Roll20, I would need a better art for that. And unfortunately, it's such a unique location that trying to build this out as a map or trying to find art for it would be kind of complicated and tricky. And it's exacerbated by the fact that it's an airship, so it has all these unique elevation differences and changes, and stairs need to go certain ways that, literally it's kind of hard to tell on this map. In fact, it's easier to look at oddly enough, it's easier to look at the handout map that the players get to try to figure out where things go than it is the actual DM map, which is a little bit of an odd aside. Final verdict: spinning off the airship heist from Dragon Bowl into a standalone heist venture is an excellent idea, held aloft with fun characters and memorable complications. Thank you everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.